What if an old notebook could bring down an entire system built on deceit? Would you have the courage to write the truth? A light drizzle blurred the windshield, smearing the faint glow of the "Open 24 Hours" sign outside Sunrise Diner number 28. Inside a weathered silver-gray pickup parked beneath a maple tree, Elijah Monroe, founder and CEO of the renowned Sunrise restaurant chain, sat still, almost like a ghost. His eyes followed the sluggish movements behind the fogged glass, where the early shift employees were beginning their day under a strangely heavy atmosphere. No one knew that the man in his 50s, wearing a faded military jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, and a beard streaked with silver, was the very person who had built this entire culinary empire from nothing. And this morning, he hadn't returned for breakfast. He was here to find out what was rotting inside the very thing he once believed in most, the culture of fairness that Sunrise prided itself on. Elijah's visit wasn't random. 3 weeks earlier, he had received an anonymous letter. No name, no phone number, just a few handwritten lines. "We work full shifts but never see a single tip. The POS system is controlled by someone close to management. If anyone still cares about justice, please take a look at location 28. The letter was folded into a wrinkled envelope and mailed to headquarters with no trace of digital origin. That detail alone sent a chill down Elijah's spine. For nearly a year, this location had exceeded revenue projections for 3 consecutive quarters, yet its employee turnover was unusually high, and staff satisfaction had dropped to rock bottom. He could no longer ignore it. He had once told his regional directors, "If you want to know whether a restaurant has integrity, don't ask the manager. Watch how the staff pours coffee at 7 in the morning." Today, he would test his own words. Elijah stepped out of the truck, pulled his cap lower, and adjusted his gait to a deliberate limp, like an old man weary from a long journey. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered the diner. No one looked up. No one greeted him. Only the bell made a sound, quietly marking the beginning of a morning that no one yet knew would change an entire system from the inside out. Elijah chose a secluded table in the farthest corner, a spot that allowed him to observe nearly the entire space without drawing attention. He removed his cap and set it on the chair beside him, then quietly looked out toward the service counter. The soft yellow light from the ceiling lamps cast a dull glow onto the worn tile floor, creating an atmosphere as muted as the mood of the place itself. No one spoke to one another, no laughter, not a single look of warmth between shifts, just footsteps, repeating in a cold rhythm, as if everyone was moving out of habit, not passion, but resignation. Amid that heavy stillness, a young woman appeared, her hair tied neatly back, her shoes scuffed at the heels. Her name was Lainey Cruz, according to the tiny name tag pinned to her shirt. Unlike the others lingering near the register, she moved with purpose, her steps brisk and efficient, her gaze focused rather than distracted. When she reached Elijah's table, she set down a cup of hot black coffee and a slice of toast with a pat of butter and 2 packets of jam. Nothing more, nothing less. "Black coffee and toast. I added butter and jam just in case," she said, her voice just above a whisper, not friendly, not cold. Elijah nodded and replied softly, "I appreciate that. Mornings like this, I bet the tips aren't bad, huh?" Just a fraction of a pause, less than a second. Not her hands, but her eyes gave the first reaction. A flicker of hesitation, a faint, uneasy smile, and then her voice dropped lower than the hum of the espresso machine behind her. Morning shift's the worst, especially when tips have to be shared. And not everyone really gets anything. Elijah took a sip. The coffee was still hot, but the bitterness seemed to come from somewhere deeper. Her words weren't complaints. They felt like a signal, a hairline crack in the system he once believed was built on transparency. And once there's a crack, he knew, something is always on the verge of collapse. Lainey returned to the counter without glancing back, but Elijah kept his eyes on every step she took, as if each movement held a clue. She pivoted to scoop coffee, moved to table 6, then shifted toward table 9. Each action so smooth it was nearly invisible to anyone not paying close attention. But Elijah missed nothing. As he watched, another detail stood out. 2 younger employees, one in a crisply pressed uniform named Ethan, and an older man named Brent, hovered near the POS terminal. They carried no trays, served no tables, only occasionally swiped cards and stood with arms crossed, scanning the room with an air of cold superiority. Nearly every transaction that morning went through the 2 of them. Meanwhile, Lainey, who was doing the bulk of the service work, never touched the register. Elijah said nothing, but his eyes quietly recorded each inconsistency, like lines drawn into a hidden map. As Lainey passed his table again to clear an empty plate, Elijah asked softly, "Why aren't you handling the payments directly?" She didn't stop, but as she leaned to collect the dish, she tilted her head and lowered her voice until it was barely a whisper. "I don't have access. Only people given special roles have that. I've been classified as supplemental support. No access code. No digital tips." Elijah looked up, their eyes locking for the first time. "Who decides that?" he asked. She gave a subtle nod toward the counter, where Scott Halpern, the branch manager, was chatting casually with a regular, wearing a dark blue shirt with a fountain pen clipped to the pocket, exuding confidence with nothing outwardly suspicious. "Ethan's his nephew, always on the morning shift. Always has full access." Elijah gripped his coffee cup a little tighter. He had built the POS system based on transparent, role-specific allocation. This wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate manipulation, a well-designed mask for favoritism disguised to look like normal procedure. And just then, Lainey did something no one expected. She pulled from her apron a worn notebook, the spine bent, the pages curled at the edges from frequent use. She didn't say much. "I'm not trying to accuse anyone. I just needed to know I wasn't imagining it. So I started writing things down." Elijah received the notebook with both hands, as though it were sacred evidence. The pages were filled with dates, table numbers, receipts, displayed tips on the system, and the actual amounts she received. Bold red circles highlighting the discrepancies, annotated margins with detailed notes. This was no longer a suspicion. This was proof. As Lainey walked away to resume her work, Elijah opened the notebook again, turning each page with careful hands. Every number, every stroke of red ink, every seed note felt like a small blade cutting into him. This was no longer just a feeling. It was a system being twisted at the core of a philosophy he had spent a lifetime believing in. Fairness must be a principle, not a slogan. He took out his phone and discreetly photographed each page. When he finished, He wrote a note on a small slip of paper in crisp, slanted handwriting. "Keep documenting. Don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return." Elijah tucked the note into the front cover and gently slid the coffee cup on top to hide it from any curious eyes. Just then, from the corner of the counter, he saw Ethan bent over the POS screen, his fingers moving with the ease of someone far more embedded than a part-time worker. In a split second, Elijah caught a glimpse of the text flashing across the screen. "Grant access. Internal priority role. Account Ethan B." His chest tightened. The system had been compromised from within. High-level access had been handed to someone who had no right to it. Meanwhile, Laney, a dedicated server, was pushed aside, without a name, without a login, without a voice. At the table next to him, a new employee struggled with a tray of pastries, unsure how to enter a custom allergy request. Laney, still without a single break, stepped in, leaned down, and patiently walked the new hire through each step. "Be careful with Ethan," she whispered, almost like a warning. "He's not doing anything wrong, but he won't help you either." Elijah heard it, and he understood. Laney was not just a waitress. She was the last ethical anchor holding this entire branch from collapsing. When Elijah stepped out of Sunrise Diner number 28 that afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the weight in his chest was as heavy as if he had just weathered a storm. He didn't look back, didn't hesitate. The car door shut, sealing off a perfect silence that allowed the explosion of thoughts in his mind to become crystal clear. He needed no more proof. What he had seen, what Laney had written in that fragile little notebook, and especially the cold expressions of those who clearly knew exactly what they were doing, all of it was enough to launch a counter-strike. Elijah pulled out his phone and scrolled for a familiar name. When the call connected, he spoke briefly, each word sharp as a blade. "Asher, we've got a problem. The POS at branch 28 has been tampered with. I need a full audit, immediately." Asher Patel, head of internal investigations, didn't need any further explanation. In 8 years working together, she had dismantled 3 embezzlement networks without a single leak of ink. She simply responded in her steady, unflinching voice. "Understood." The call ended in 93 seconds, and that was precisely when the POS system at branch 28 was switched into silent audit mode, an internal tool never publicly revealed. No one in the diner knew that from that moment forward, every login, every change in access level, every tip allocation or receipt adjustment was being recorded in real time. No alarms, no notifications, no blinking systems. The diner ran as usual. Customers came and went, coffee was poured, and Ethan stood behind the touchscreen like he ruled the place. But from within, every tap of his fingers, every brush across privileged access menus, every subtle transfer to shadow accounts, all of it was being reversed. Elijah knew this. Those who manipulate from the shadows never expect that justice will arrive from the quietest direction. And he also knew that from this moment on, the fight was no longer about breakfast. This was a purge, not just to save one location, but to preserve the soul of an entire system he had spent his life building. Less than 20. 4 hours after the call, Elijah received the first report from Asher. On the screen of his personal computer, the initial data appeared like ink spreading across white paper, impossible to erase. 3 special accounts were discovered with hidden access rights beneath the standard permission layers. The first name, Ethan Barlow. The second, Scott Halpern. And the third, the most peculiar, Kitchen Support 03. An entity with no personnel record, no valid ID, yet it appeared consistently on the morning check in logs 20, 1 times over 20, 5 days. That would have been impossible unless it was a ghost account. Elijah slowly scrolled through each page. The total digital tip amount at branch 28 in the past 30 days had exceeded $4,800. But what chilled him was that 67% of that amount had flowed directly into Ethan's account, even though the tables he served accounted for less than 15% of all activity. Numbers don't lie. They only point directly to the truth that polite smiles can never conceal. Usher dug deeper. The Kitchen Support 03 account was linked to payment transactions involving a company named Halpern Logistics LLC, registered out of state, supposedly a vendor providing auxiliary staff. But when the tech team pulled up legal data, the contact email address made Elijah sit upright. It was the former address of Scott Halpern, back when he was still an assistant manager 2 years ago. Elijah remembered that branch. It had faced internal allocation discrepancies during Scott's tenure. At the time, there was no solid evidence. The records were blurred, the chain of transfers severed before they could reach central accounting. But now, the data lines were beginning to connect into a complete system, like an underground map emerging through thick fog. And Elijah realized Lainey wasn't just dealing with unfairness at the service level. She had accidentally stumbled into a multi-layered manipulation network, where the system had been rebuilt to serve a select few, and the silence of everyone else was the rest of the iceberg. Elijah now had to break apart. Friday morning at exactly 9:06 a.m., the door of Sunrise Diner number 28 swung open to the familiar chime of the bell mounted on the wooden frame. But this time, there was no flannel shirt or baseball cap to hide his face. Elijah Monroe walked in with a straight posture, wearing a charcoal gray suit, polished leather shoes, and the composed air of a man who had once cut the ribbon at 50 grand openings across the country. He didn't need an introduction. Every pair of eyes behind the counter, at the tables, or mopping the floor, recognized exactly who he was. The room stiffened in an instant, tension tightening like a drawn bow. Scott Halpern froze mid-sentence with a regular customer, his hands falling to his sides as if he'd lost direction. Ethan Barlow stood paralyzed behind the POS terminal, his finger still hovering above the touchscreen. Brent halted mid-step with a tray of coffee, slightly tilting as if unsure whether to move forward or step back. Elijah stepped up to the counter, placed his hand on the time-worn wooden surface, and spoke slowly, his voice resonating just enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I won't take much of your time, just the 15 years I've spent building this place." Behind him, Asha Patel entered, clad in a black coat and holding a tablet in hand. She didn't introduce herself. She simply tapped the screen. A series of charts appeared. Tip distribution graphs, lists of hidden access permissions, transaction trails linked to Halpern Logistics. No narration was needed. The visuals spoke for themselves. Elijah looked Scott straight in the eye. "You're suspended immediately. Ethan as well. Both of you will report to the legal department. There's no place here for anyone who turns a transparency tool into a family cash register. He turned to face each employee, not to search for fear, but for understanding. And it emerged, no longer lowered eyes avoiding confrontation, but heads beginning to rise and meet his gaze. Elijah gave a slight nod, then pointed to the POS terminal still displaying its locked screen. From today on, this system will no longer be the private domain of whoever stands behind it. It belongs to those who actually serve. And with that, the once invisible man officially returned, not just as a CEO, but as the one who reclaimed the boundary of fairness for everyone. The air inside the diner felt as heavy as a sentence just handed down. No one clapped. No one cheered. But in the eyes of each employee, something had shifted. Something that had been suppressed for far too long. The feeling of being seen. Elijah took a step back, his gaze landing on a young man standing near the back counter, still holding a cleaning cloth as if he hadn't had time to let go. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy startled, then hesitated. Noah. Noah Reyes." Elijah nodded, his expression offering a quiet trust. "You'll be the first to log into the new system." All eyes turned to Noah as he stepped forward and placed his hand on the POS screen, like he was touching something he'd never been allowed to before. The system accepted his login code. No alerts, no blocks, no vague roles, just one account, one real person, and one rightful place. Asher tapped in a few commands. On the screen appeared the transparent tip tracking board by shift, each green line showing automatic allocation based on actual labor, no more gray zones or anonymous roles. Ethan disappeared from the system. The old access cards were deactivated. But the biggest change wasn't in the software. It was in the way people began to look at one another. No more hesitation. No more downcast eyes. And Lainey, the one who used to move between kitchen and table like a shadow, now stood tall, her gaze calm. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Just standing there, in the very space that once made her feel invisible, now rightfully belonged to those who truly deserved to be seen. 1 week later, Elijah Monroe returned to Sunrise Diner number 28. No announcement, no suit, no entourage. He was simply an older man walking into the restaurant like any regular customer. The new POS system was still running smoothly. The screen displayed each tip distribution clearly, eliminating the need to ask, "Has it been shared yet?" Because now, everything was visible. Elijah chose the same corner table where he had once quietly sat and watched. The light streaming through the window was no longer dull and foggy like that day, but remarkably clear. A young staff member brought out a coffee and offered a genuine smile. Lainey no longer served tables. She stood near the counter, guiding a group of new employees on how to verify access permissions before starting their shifts. Her voice was calm and firm, not raised but commanding attention, the kind of authority that comes only from someone who has truly lived what they are teaching. Elijah didn't stay long. Before leaving, he tucked a $20 bill under his half-eaten pancake plate, along with a handwritten note in fountain pen ink. "Thank you for writing it down. When everyone else turned away, you're not alone anymore. And now, no one is." When clearing the table, Lainey noticed it. She didn't open it immediately. She just looked at the note for a moment, exhaled softly, then folded it carefully as if it were something she had memorized long ago. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But her eyes, steady and at peace, said it all. Justice doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it begins with one quiet act, and someone brave enough to write the truth when the world chooses silence. That evening, after all the shifts had ended, Sunrise Diner number 28 was unusually quiet. In the small break room tucked in the back, Lainey sat alone and placed the old notebook on the table. The pages had yellowed, the corners were wrinkled, and some ink had bled from sweat, tears, or the rushed moments when she had to hide it in her apron as someone approached. She didn't flip through it or reread the contents. She didn't need to. Every number, every note, every red circle drawn around something unjust was now part of the system, embedded in the new policy and etched into the hearts of those who once believed they were invisible. Instead, she gently removed each page, stacked them neatly into a brown envelope, and sealed it with a narrow strip of tape. On the front, she wrote in simple black pen, heavy with meaning. To the one who comes next, in case one day you need proof that you are not crazy for seeing what no one dares to admit. There was no speech, no spotlight, no background music. Just one small act, yet carrying the full weight of a transformation. The next morning, that envelope was placed on the desk of the new manager at the next branch preparing to implement the transparent tip sharing model. She left no name. She didn't need to. Because now the system was finally working as it was meant to, recognizing the real person, acknowledging real labor, and paying fair wages. Lainey no longer stood behind the diner counter. She had become a regional training manager, not through degrees or formal tests, but through a story, a notebook, and a belief proven through action. In other locations, new employees wept the first time they saw their names appear on the tip-sharing screen. They weren't crying over money. They cried because for the first time, they were acknowledged as someone who mattered. Elijah Monroe read the end of Month Report, where the company-wide turnover rate had dropped by 18%. But he only highlighted one line, a newly added question on the internal employee survey. Do you feel seen in your workplace? No algorithm could measure that, but Elijah knew it was that feeling of being seen that truly sustains a company. And thanks to one notebook written in brave silence, people were finally, undeniably seen. Fairness does not come naturally. It is safeguarded by those who dare to confront what is wrong, who take notes when others stay silent, and who act when no one else will step forward. In any organization, what saves it is not the slogans, but people like Lainey, quiet yet unwavering. If you believe that change begins with the smallest act, please, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the real stories that strike at the core. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Now we see," because sometimes simply being seen is enough to transform an entire system.